is a painting by David Shepherd, which was done in the 60s, at the same time as when my father was based in Jahili. And David Shepherd was quite a famous artist who painted a lot of military pictures around the world. And it pictures patrol about to go out, both mounted on camel and also Land Rovers, which is what they basically used at the time, to go around the area around Al Ain, even down towards the Rub al Khali, the empty quarter, and a little bit up towards Dubai. And this was where we lived, up in this this second floor, as it were. We approach from the outside. This is from the outside. We approach from the other side, and so there was a mess, and then quarters and things where the officers lived, and families. When we were allowed, we came and stayed in there as well. And then behind there was a place where the soldiers and the other ranks had their mess and everything. So, and there was nothing around the whole of that area of Jahili Fort. The nearest thing was the other palace where Sheikh Zayed used to reside sometimes.
Amazing. Can you tell me your first memory of coming to the Jahili Fort? In what year was it, and how old were you?
So this was 1965, the summertime, so it was quite warm. But as a child, you know, nearly 8 years old, all excitement, and children not really bothered so much by the heat. And yeah, great excitement. You can imagine, you know, being in a Land Rover like this, driving across the desert as a young child, a boy anyway, big excitement. And going into places where, you know, not many people had been before from the West and things, and seeing new things. It was all big, like a school day every day, even though it was school holidays.
Yeah.
It was continuation of learning and seeing new things, meeting new people, learning to sit on camels and things.
Do you remember that first moment when you saw Jahili Fort from the top of the dome?
Like Beaugest. I mean, you know, it's like boy's own annual come true. So when I came out in 1965 to join my father, he was a major in the Trucial Oman Scouts. He was commanding C Squadron, who were at that time based in Jahili. The squadrons would be rotated around the various camps and forts that they were positioned at, just to give them change and give them sort of different perspectives and things. And so the Trucial Oman Scouts at the time were responsible for the defence. The UK had a defence pact with the various Trucial states, Abu Dhabi being one of the Trucial states at that time. And their responsibility was, you know, safety and security and supporting the sheikhs and the local tribes and things, making sure that people were safe and well looked after. And Sheikh Zayed was the ruler's representative at that time, based in Al Ain, and Jahili was responsible for that area of Al Ain, and so his role there was to make sure that there was peace and stability in the area, and make sure that, you know, he was supporting Sheikh Zayed and the tribes and things, and obviously coordinating, working very closely with Sheikh Zayed, because Sheikh Zayed was obviously very, and I think one of the nicest things about Sheikh Zayed, he was a very, very caring person. The most important thing for Sheikh Zayed was always his people, and he took great care of his people to make sure that, you know, there wasn't a lot available, but what was available, they had it, and that they were safe. You know, safety is obviously a high priority, particularly in that time. It was not the easiest of times. The reason there was a defence treaty was obviously because there were threats and things in the region. It wasn't the calmest of regions. And so why Jahili, you know, why was Jahili placed there? Well, because it was strategically well located. Most forts are in strategic locations, and it was the sort of meeting point of Oman, Saudi Arabia, and Abu Dhabi, Trucial State at that time. And so it was an important location for Sheikh Zayed, for Abu Dhabi obviously, to make sure that they kept their territory and that their people were safe in the territory. And so my father's role was to, support Sheikh Zayed, and they would liaise obviously very closely with each other to make sure that, things were going well. Sheikh Zayed was a regular visitor to Jahili Fort. He was a great gatherer of information, and he had this wonderful way of getting information out of people in the nicest possible way, just sitting and chatting very casually, informally with the soldiers, asking them how their families were, from a very genuinely caring place, making sure that their families were okay, but also to find out, what was going on within the tribes and things, to make sure that the tribes themselves were happy with their neighbours and things. It was a very tribal, area. It's still a little tribal today, but at that time it was very tribal, and sometimes there were skirmishes, disagreements and things, as happens everywhere in the world. And so, Sheikh Zayed was keen to make sure that there was peace and stability amongst the tribes. So he would come into the fort and he would talk to the soldiers, because he knew that the soldiers were going out on patrols, in all different directions and things. They were close to the borders with Saudi Arabia, close to the borders with Oman. What were the Omani tribes up to? What were the Saudi tribes up to? And he would gather information from various different people, and then he would assemble that information, map out pictures in his mind and things. He would talk with my father, discuss tactics and see, if there were any areas they thought might be weak, or any areas that might need strengthening, any issues that might need sorting out. Sometimes locusts came. I mean, people forget that there were a lot of locusts at that time. Sometimes there was lack of water, and so certain areas needed helping. And the soldiers would report back on their patrols, and my father would assimilate all the information and then talk with Sheikh Zayed, and then make out a strategy and a plan, and help each other to, as I say, primarily to maintain the peace, but also to help the tribes in the area to be, to make the most of a tough situation at that time. As I say, people forget how poor the place was. Sometimes you see modern photographs of, enactments of Bedouin life at the time, and I see young children in dish dashes, white white dish dashes. Well, when I was a child there, I didn't see any young kids in white dish dashes, that's for sure. Very rarely did the dish dash get worn, and that was maybe on a Eid holiday or something like that. There were no washing machines, there was no electricity, no water available for washing machines, and so of course they didn't have white dish dashes and things. They didn't have shoes. It was tough, but they were tough people, and happy people, as I said earlier. They got along with what they had and enjoyed and were grateful for what they did have. But for me, as a child coming from the West, where everybody had everything and we were all very fortunate, it was like, wow, it's how lucky I am. But actually I can be happy without all the Lego and Action Man toys and all the rest of it that we were given as children.
It's amazing. And do you remember the first moment when Sheikh Zayed came into your presence, your first meeting with Sheikh Zayed?
I can't say I remember the actual time, but I can remember the time when Sheikh Zayed, it must have been one of the first times, because it was when I got my name changed. And Sheikh Zayed was very amused when my father introduced me to him about my name in English, and the soldiers were sort of smiling as well. The officers around obviously knew why Sheikh Zayed was laughing and what the the issue was with my name. And he said, you cannot call your son that here. That is not acceptable. So, and he looked at me and he said, you got broad shoulders, and I'm going to call you Mankab, Mim Nun Kaf Ba, which meant broad shoulders, because he thought I had broad shoulders, rather than calling me Nick, which he didn't think was an appropriate name. And interestingly, his older brother had given me the nickname of Necklace, which sounds like Nicholas, and he knew, Shakbut knew the name Nicholas, so he called me Necklace. But Sheikh Zayed, no, Nick was like, no, that we're not going there. No. We'll call you Mankab. And so even today, some of his sons, they call me Mankab. Some of the other Emiratis I knew from that time call me Mankab as well.
How wonderful to have a nickname given to you by Sheikh Zayed himself. I mean, that's phenomenal.
Yeah, well, it was for good reason. And he was protecting me as an 8-year-old child, you know, looking after my future. Bless him. And he was so endearing. And that was one of the other things I remember about him, was even as a child, you know, he'd put his arm around you and bring you close and make you included and loved. And he was wonderful with children. I mean, just wonderful.
What was a day like at the Jahili Fort? What
well,
meals like?
I remember rice. I mean, I can remember rice, and I can remember these sweet little bananas. They had these very short but very sweet bananas. But I do remember eating a lot of rice, and that was wherever you went, you had rice. It was like, you know, luckily I liked rice as a child, so it wasn't a problem. But it was all very local food. There was no Yorkshire pudding and roast beef, no roast chicken. And to be honest, I didn't miss roast chicken for, you know, a few weeks. It was really nice not to have roast meals and things, just for a change.
You talk about washing your hands, not being able to wash your hands much.
So there was water in Al Ain. We were lucky. One of the reasons Al Ain was bigger than Abu Dhabi at that time was because there was a natural oasis there, and we had access to water. And so we actually had a dip swimming pool in Jahili, which was nice to be able to swim as a child, you know. Not big swimming pool, but a little place to splash around in, which was fun. And then when we went out though into the desert, down to the Liwa, the Rub al Khali, on these patrols and things, you know, then there was no water down there. And so that's where, you know, when you had a picnic, as it were, and goat or whatever, and rice and all the rest of it, and your hands were all greasy because no plates or spoons and forks or anything like that. Everybody just, we used to call it mutton grab.
Oh yeah.
So you put your hands in, and so after the meal your hands are filthy, but there's no water to wash your hands, and so you turned around, literally used the sand and scrubbed all the mess off with the sand. And so from that stage I learnt about the scarcity and the value of water.
When did your dad leave the fort? When was it over?
So my father was based in the UAE, for at least Abu Dhabi, from 1965 until 1969. But the Trucial Oman Scouts, they left in 1971 when the Federation took place. And in that interim period, between 69 and 71, they started forming first of all, the Abu Dhabi Defence Force, the Dubai Defence Force. Ras Al Khaimah had a brigade, and then eventually it became the UAE Armed Forces with the Federation. So there was a transition period, but the interesting thing for my father's squadron was that, and the other squadrons, was that his second in command at that time initially was a Royal Marine, which was unusual to find a Royal Marine in the middle of the desert, a British Royal Marine. And then his other officers, Emiratis, and they'd two of them, Abdullah Ali and Ali Abaid, they had both been to Mons, part of Sandhurst, British Army officer training, and so first class soldiers, and both those, they were lieutenants at that time. They both ended up as major generals, so they had a good start to their careers with some real soldiering, as it were. They were operational, not just training exercises. They were on operations, and they earned their stripes, as they say. They well qualified officers, and they really helped build. So when it did transition from TOS to UAE Armed Forces, they had some really good officers, cadre, to help them with that transition. Emiratis, and it's a very clever model that they're still using today in the sort of 4.0 version in all sorts of walks of life. Sending Emiratis off to get experience and things in other countries. Sandhurst. I mean, the most officer cadets of any foreign country come from the UAE, and it serves their military. They have a really good armed forces here. Their officer cadre is absolutely outstanding, and not all that long ago, one of the Al Mazrouis won the Sword of Honor. So that's the best officer cadet out of all of the officer cadets, came from the UAE, above all of the Brits, above all of all the countries. Obviously, in the 60s, when my father was here, I got the sand between the toes, as they say, and fell in love with the people. It's the people that make a place, and their friendliness and their warmth and their positivity and their gratitude was very attractive. And so when it came to the gap year that we have in the UK system, I thought, well, great, let's go back. And luckily my godfather was here. He had been political agent with Sheikh Shakbut and Sheikh Zayed, and so he said, yes, you're always welcome. His godfather, close. He was like my grandfather to me, who I didn't know. And so he said, you come here for your gap year and come and stay with me. I've set up this stables in Mizyad, which is on the border with Oman, underneath Jebel Hafit. And you can ride, because my father was a cavalry officer, so obviously I could ride, and you can help me run the stables, and then I can go off on long holidays and do some work that Sheikh Zayed wants me to do, and you can look after the stables whilst I'm gone. And Sheikh Zayed wanted him to go, the mid-70s, to go to places like America and to lecture in America, to tell the Americans, what's this country, the United Arab Emirates. Federation was 1971, so by the mid-70s, a lot of people still didn't know what's the UAE, and they unfortunately thought of it was part of Saudi Arabia, or had no idea. And so Sheikh Zayed wanted to spread the word, and what better way than get a knight of the British realm and a trusted friend of his than ask Colonel Sir Hugh Bousted to go to places like University of California, Berkeley, and lecture there and tell them. So he would go away for 6 months and leave me looking after the stables. And with the stables we had a clinic, so that's why I was the local village doctor, as it were, without any formal, I'd done all the first aid training that you do at school and things like that. But with Sheikh Zayed's blessing, he would allow me to get medicine from the either the Jahili hospital, or before that the Oasis hospital, which was actually a missionary hospital in Al Ain. Talk about tolerance. The first hospital here was a missionary hospital, and wonderful people. Kennedy, I mean, it was called the Oasis or Waha, Mustashfa or Waha, but we all knew it as Mustashfa Kennedy because of Kennedy, the doctor there. Lovely family. And so they would give us medicine, and after that the Jahili hospital give us medicine, and so we could give medicine to the people in the village, because they knew that we had medicine for the horses, So if you're giving medicine to the horses, why can't you look after us as well? Good logic, you know, why not? So we had a surgery in the morning and the evening to look after the people. But so I didn't go to my university, and I didn't go the following year. I mean, I was enjoying it, and sometimes, you know, Sheikh Zayed would go off and we would travel with him, and you know, that was an honor as well, to go off hunting falcons and with falcons in Pakistan and things, Morocco. So it was just a fun, enjoyable, always learning, you know. Sheikh Zayed was a great teacher, and I was very lucky that when I was looking after the horses, he was my direct line manager, because his entourage and the people around him knew nothing about horses, and they didn't want to make a mistake or second guess him, you know. His passion was animals, horses. He was an expert, and so I would say, well, you know, do you think he wants me to? No, don't ask us. Go see Sheikh Zayed. Go and ask Sheikh Zayed, which was great for me, because it meant I would go to the different palaces and things, because he skipped around a lot. He didn't, you know, sit in one place. He was forever out and about, and so, you know, tracking him down was quite a fun experience. And then, you know, I was the little boy, so I would sit at the end of the queue. Heads of state would come into the palaces, and there would be debates about this, that, and the other. And, you know, I got to see all of this. Palaces were very open, you know, and we were very lucky to be able to witness all these affairs of the state, as it were, and how he dealt with people, you know, how kind he was to people, how respectful he was to people, and to see these heads of state, and, you know, they all respected him. You know, it was a mutual thing. You know, you respect somebody, you get respect back. Yeah. And you know, that for me was a great learning to see all of that, and then to be able to go and ask him, you know, do you want this mare to be crossed by this stallion? and you know, for him it was like, this was a fun part of the day. You know, and then sometimes he'd say, oh, let's go to Mizyad. I haven't been to Mizyad. And so we'd all jump in the Land Rovers and the Range Rovers and off to Mizyad from Al-Hazna or whichever palace he was in, and impromptu visit, you know, just arrive, and and there was no telephone to say to the grooms, Sheikh Zayed's on his way. You know, it's like we just appear. Then he would show me stuff and tell me stuff without, you know, lecturing, and that was his way of teaching, was to show. You know, and it's such a nice way to be taught. Absolutely. to be shown things, for him to give you time. You know, okay, I'm 18, 19, 20, whatever at the time. Perhaps I didn't realize how fortunate I was, like I do today. So we had lots of interesting visitors come to Abu Dhabi in the 70s, still a new place, and they didn't all necessarily arrive by aeroplane or boat or car. And one such team of visitors that I can remember very clearly was three gentlemen who came from Amman, Jordan. Roger Upton, who is a famous falconer, and anybody from Marlborough will know has got a very nice leather shop in Marlborough, and Mark Allen, who is now Sir Mark Allen, who was working in the British Embassy at that time, was a member of the Foreign Office, and a great Arabist. And if you want to know anything about the Arabs, he's written a great book called The Arabs. He's also a very famous calligraphist. And then last but not least, the most important person, as far as they were concerned, for them, was Sayyid Salman Abu Adra. And why was he important to them? Because he was the gentleman who led them. How did they arrive? By camel. So they rode from Jordan to Abu Dhabi by camel. Sayyid's grandfather was a famous Bedouin who had ridden alongside Lawrence of Arabia, so he understood the ways of the desert. He was also an authority on falcons and an authority on camels, and he actually ended up, God rest his soul, he ended up in Oxford University as a lecturer on camels. And when he arrived here, he could not speak a word of English. So to transition from guiding two Brits on camels through the desert from Amman to Abu Dhabi to lecturer in Oxford is quite a transition. Anyway, of course, when they arrived in Abu Dhabi, there was only one hotel for them to stay at, the Hilton Hotel, which was relatively new at that time, Abu Dhabi's first five-star hotel. So they tied their camels up outside the Hilton, as you do. And of course, it wasn't very long before Sheikh Zayed got to hear, because Sheikh Zayed knew everything that was going on anywhere in town, got to hear about their arrival, and of course he invited them to his palace. And in fact, a year later, Roger Upton came and held one of the first conferences in 1976, one of the first conferences on falcons, you know, ever in the world, in Abu Dhabi, because Sheikh Zayed loved falcons, and Roger Upton was an authority on falcons. And Sheikh Zayed hired Said to work for him, because he knew that the gentleman was an authority on camels, and camels are obviously a very important part of the Bedouin heritage and all the rest of it. And then Said used to come up and visit us in Mizyard. We would go out into the desert and things. And so Sheikh Zayed had this idea of, he was concerned that things were changing so rapidly, and this is mid-70s, things were changing so rapidly that some of the heritage might be lost. And so he asked Said and myself to go into the desert, down into places like Ain al-Fayda, Zamul, down in towards the Liwa, as well as around Alain, Hafit, to Wigan. We have a place called Wigan. For people from the north of England, they'll be amused that we also have a Wigan in the empty quarter of Arabia. And so we go down there with one of these old tape recorders, you know, the cassettes and things, and we'd go and record stories for Sheikh Zayed. We'd ask the Bedouin to tell us the stories, you know, about their families, recite poetry, and then these cassettes were all taken back and we played them to Sheikh Zayed, and he loved listening to the old poetry and things like that. Sometimes he would, you know, that's so good, I've got to go and hear that live. Everybody into the Range Rovers, Land Rovers, down to Zamul, and find this poet. I want to hear this, you know, firsthand. And so, you know, I mean, it's a side that you don't see or hear so much about Sheikh Zayed, because he loved these things. Here he was, head of a state, and a newly formed state, in a pretty tricky situation regionally. Wasn't the calmest and smoothest, and yet he managed to get that work-life balance correct. You know, he took things seriously when he needed to. He had fun when he needed to. He kept in touch with his heritage all the time, kept in touch with his people the whole time, and that was really important to him, because, as I said, his most important thing were his people, and he wanted to stay in touch with them, to know what was going on. But he was also frightened of losing some of the heritage, and so getting these cassettes and these recordings made was important to him. And they were all put into what was then the Centre for Documentation, which then became is today the National Archive. So hopefully somewhere there they've got all these recordings that Said Salman Abu Adra, grandson of one of the famous people who rode with Lawrence of Arabia, made down in the Liwa on behalf of Sheikh Zayed, to keep the heritage, the history. Thesiger had come through in the late 40s. Sheikh Zayed was obviously up in Alain at that time. Sheikh Zayed had received him. and beneficently, you know, helped him with his exploration. He was actually, part of his desire and part of his remit at that time was to do some studies for the locust issues, and so the experts on locusts couldn't understand how there were locusts in Abu Dhabi, Al Ain, because they thought there was no water, and so how would there be locust swarms if there was no water? But actually there is some water. And so anyway, Thessinger's job was to go and have a look, see where these locusts were. That was his excuse anyway, to get into exploring the empty quarter. So he went. Sheikh Zayed thought it was a bit strange that here were the Emiratis trying to get out of the desert and into modernization, into more comfort, and this eccentric British gentleman wants to go backwards and into and see what it's all like living out in the sands. But you know, as I say, Sheikh Zayed was kind and beneficent, and each to his own, and so helped the gentleman, thinking, well, maybe I'll learn something, you know, maybe he'll see something I don't see in this whole thing, but I'll carry on my progress and I'll hear him when he comes back. And Thesinger came back, and you know, it obviously had an interesting trip and enjoyed it, and he wrote his book Arabian Sands, which is a must read for everybody who comes to the UAE, in my opinion, because he was an intrepid explorer. It was interesting because Thesinger came back in the late 70s when I was there in Mizyad, and so we took him to see Sheikh Zayed, and you know, Thesinger had a good look around the country and was appalled. I mean, very, very angry about all of the change. And so we went to Sheikh Zayed, and Thesinger had a good rant. I mean, seriously, good rant. You know, you've spoilt this country, you've spoilt your people, you've destroyed all of their heritage. And, you know, and Zayed listened to it, because Zayed was, as I say, he respected people. And that was Thesinger's opinion. And but then Zayed said, well, this is what I've done for the people, this is what the people wanted, and feel free to go and ask the people, are they happier now or as things were back then? Well, of course, all the people in the Majlis, not just because they love Sheikh Zayed, but because they were genuinely a lot more happier today and at that time in the late 70s than they had been, you know, in the late 40s when Thesinger came through the first time. And you cannot deprive people progress. We all want progress. It's essential, as Darwin and others have proven, that, you know, dinosaurs went extinct because they didn't change. Kodak aren't famous for making film anymore because they didn't change. You know, we all have options, and Zayed took the change option, and the country has benefited ever since. His sons continue his legacy. Interestingly, though, Thesinger came back again, and I saw him in the 90s.
He did.
And 1993, I think it was, he came back. He's a much older gentleman at this stage, obviously, and he'd moved from Kenya to London and all the rest of it. Very, very distinguished. I mean, lovely, lovely gentleman. But he'd mellowed, and he got it. He'd finally got it that actually change is okay. It's how you change. And, you know, and Sheikh Zayed, you know, got that as well, because one area that they did agree on was this thing about combined combustion engine. And, you know, now we've got climate change. Neither of them like pollution. You know, Thesinger and Zayed were dead against pollution. And Zayed was doing climate change back in the 60s, and without calling it climate change. I mean, I think I mentioned in the book about what he did for flaring. You know, he didn't like flaring. There were gas at that time in the 60s was a nuisance. When oil companies found gas, they just wanted oil. They didn't want the gas that sometimes came with it, and they would just burn it. And, you know, you could sit on the corniche, before it was the corniche, just on the sand, and if you had a white dish dash, if you were lucky, it would be sometimes, if the wind was blowing from Das Island, it would be covered in black particles, not nice, and it stank, you know, the rotten eggs, H2S. And so Zayed said to the BP engineers, this is not acceptable. This is polluting the environment. We cannot do this. 1969, you know. And they said, oh, go away, find a solution. So they came back and said, well, we found a solution, but it's very expensive. He said, but this is not about money. This is about the environment. You're not hearing, you're not understanding, you're not smelling the coffee. Yeah. This is about protecting the environment. If we don't protect the environment, it doesn't matter about the money. We need to protect the environment. Anyway, the engineers went away, BP engineers, they came back eventually and they actually found a solution, which was to turn this gas into liquefied natural gas, LNG, and they found some Japanese who were keen to have the energy because their country didn't have natural resources. And so they put this gas in. They had to invent ships, LNG ships. They put it into LNG ships and they transported it to Japan. Now the interesting thing is, Sheikh Zayed's motivation was the environment. Today, ADNOC LNG is printing money. You know, he was doing the right thing as the primary motivator. The outcome has been a huge revenue of income, a source of income for the country. And I can see the same legacy coming now. The new president, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, has got this thing about hydrogen. Engineers, let's get hydrogen. Let's focus and let's do this hydrogen thing. And he's got a lot of people working on hydrogen. And we will go from grey to blue, from blue to green. And my gut tells me, in a few years' time, although it's costing money today to get the technology to get to where we want to, this will be like the LNG story, version 4.0, the new presidential way, but the same legacy. You know, we will get clean energy, we will stop the pollution from the grey hydrogen, as it were, which is not good for the planet. So I love the way their legacy, Sheikh Zayed put these legacies down. He didn't, you know, it's not just a one-time, this works now and it'll never work. No, but his sons carry on and they say, okay, well, we can update this to the 1.0, 2.0, 4.0, whatever, but the same principle. And it's the same with peace in the region. You know, Sheikh Zayed wanted peace and stability. He brought the 7 Emirates together. It was not an easy task. And then, you know, he made friends with his neighbours. Not an easy task. You know, they say countries that have trade between them don't have borders, soldiers on their borders. And that was Sheikh Zayed's thinking. And now it's been taken on in a 4.0 version. But underlying it is because we've got a system here which the United Nations could learn from, which enables, you know, whatever it is, nearly 200 different nationalities from all different sorts of walks of life to come here and to enjoy a lifestyle that is really better than perhaps it could be in other parts or their own countries. And so it wasn't as comfortable back in the 1960s as it is today, but it's still as attractive. So the attraction, the people basically, the tolerance, the system that enables the people to be happy is still here. And you know, we only get one life. If we're not happy, if we're not enjoying our life, then what's the point? And I can't say it's because you're making me happy or you're making me unhappy. It's me. It's all up to me. I have to make sure that I'm happy. This country enables me to make sure that I'm happy. It enables me to seek within inside that contentment and serenity, which I found as a kid and has stuck with me. And I'm grateful for that, really. I'm grateful that the legacies have enabled that contentment, serenity to stay with me.